So I just finished reading Arthur Schopenhauer's Essays and Aphorisms. It is, as the title suggests, a bunch of essays and aphorisms by Arthur Schopenhauer, and I think it's actually it came out in 1851 as not as essays and aphorisms, but as a longer work that collected a lot of his notes and stuff. But this is a Penguin Classics version where they kind of condensed a lot of his writings so that they wouldn't be redundant, and it came out with this kind of short volume of sorts, similar in the same way that Penguin Classics did with what was that other book I read recently? The Seneca book, Letters from a Stoic. They didn't really show all the letters, but then they showed kind of a compendium of some of the most important ones and the ones that are not too redundant. This is a very fascinating book, and I really enjoyed it. The reason why I'm reading Schopenhauer is because I'm trying to, again, as I may have mentioned in some of my other videos, I'm trying to lead up to Nietzsche. So at first, I read Dostoyevsky, and then I'm reading Schopenhauer, which actually preceded Dostoyevsky. Dostoyevsky was very influenced by Schopenhauer, I think. And then I actually have to go a bit further back in time as well. I'm going backwards of sorts, and next I'm going to read Goethe's Faust. But, so, this is interesting. So I'll give an example of some of the titles of how the thing is structured is based on topic. So the first half of the book are the essays, and you have things like, for example, on the suffering of the world, on the vanity of existence, on suicide, on religion, a dialogue, and these kinds of things are kind of, it's just an elucidation of a lot of Schopenhauer's ways of thinking about the world and how he kind of processed things going on around him. He's quite popular for his main thing that kind of differentiated Schopenhauer is his study of the idea that we are all driven by the idea of will. It is the human will that kind of drives us to do anything, and he suggests that it is life in itself is a negative in value, and the goal of which is we have to kind of suppress our will to live, and that will kind of lead to, I guess, cessation of suffering. As you're listening to it and it sounds kind of similar to the cessation of suffering due to the removal of desire that you might have in some Eastern religions, and Schopenhauer is actually quite popular for being one of the first Western philosophers to really meld the writings of Hinduism and Buddhism, the Eastern texts, with Western philosophy, where Eastern and Western philosophy kind of were melded into Schopenhauer's ways of thinking of the world, and melded in a way that kind of reinforced his very pessimistic outlook on society and on life. Very on the cusp of nihilism, perhaps. He's very influential, and a lot of what he talks about is quite intriguing, and I learned a lot from reading the book. What is very fascinating, I think. Also Carl Jung, who I just finished reading, I made a video of earlier today. He was also a big fan of Schopenhauer, and a lot of his thoughts on mythology seems very much like a extension of what Schopenhauer talks about here. There's some interesting things here. I mean, for example, if you want to know what he thinks about suicide, he thinks that it's fine. I think, the idea is that we need to have the ability to kind of have control over our own actions, and suicide is the furthest extent to which we have power over our own body. We have power over our body, and that shouldn't be taken away from us. Schopenhauer has thoughts on ethics, which are interesting. He has a bit of a controversial chapter here where his misogyny gets very heavily delineated, where he complains about women a lot, and some of in the intro of the book actually kind of guesses that perhaps it has something to do with his kind of fractured relationship with his mother. One of the theories that go behind his very strong misogyny was that he was never able to forgive his mother for getting over his father so quickly after his father died, and his mother remarried soon after. And his mother was also kind of like she was like a goal. It was a goal of his to kind of become more popular than his mother to some degree, and his mother would tease him about how he would never be a good writer, and I guess that served as some kind of motivation for him. My favorite things that Schopenhauer kind of discusses and talks about is that when he goes into his talks about religion and myths. So very similarly to Carl Jung, Schopenhauer really discusses this is a very nice thing. I really recommend everyone to read it. It's called On Religion, a Dialogue, where he creates some kind of dialogue of sorts between two characters, one a very religious person and one perhaps an atheist of sorts, where they go back and forth arguing over the extent to which religion is actually important or vital. And one of the things I find interesting is that it seems that Schopenhauer doesn't necessarily, even though he has a very pessimistic outlook and he may be one of the precursors to the very strong nihilism that kind of, goes over the whole West. From reading the book, my impression of it is actually that Schopenhauer appreciates religion. He actually does like religion. And he understands the importance of myths in religion. He understands the importance of how religion uses a lot of storytelling and mythology and archetypes in order to impart more greater fundamental truths of the world. He doesn't shy away from those ideas, and he actually embraces them. He embraces this idea, but one of the things that he kind of is worried about, not really worried about, what he finds concerning about religion in itself is that in order to get to those ends of higher truths, it requires a lot of lying. The lying is in the presupposition or in the doctrinal, dogmatic declaration that a lot of what the sacred texts, for example, discuss are all factually true. They all actually happen, is all literal. And now, obviously, right now we have a bit of a more nuanced view on this, and where many people are more open to the idea that some scriptural content, some scriptures are more metaphorical perhaps than literal, and right now we have a better understanding of how to approach these texts without throwing the baby out of the bathwater in some sense. And you just, instead of removing the entirety of religion and religious texts per se, to find the kind of important truths in them and kind of extract that from them. But again, Schopenhauer is worried about the idea that, again, it seems to rely on lies, because you say it's all real stuff, it's all happened, and he believes that the only way that can turn out is that the more rationally minded, the enlightened individuals who will come to their senses to some degree and realize that, again, it's all a bit of a farce to some. And he says that he finds that very tenuous, and that doesn't seem like a good structure to start a society on. But he does openly accept how much benefit some aspects of religion can give to some people, but the way he talks about it is, at least the way he kind of constructs the dialogue between the two characters, makes it seem like even those who are of religious background, the religious authorities, he makes it sound like they do 100%. They actually do believe that it's all a bit of a farce, and they're purposefully indoctrinating people on lies because of the pursuit of a higher goal, as opposed to actually believing what they're saying. So he kind of paints them as a bit of they're kind of like charlatans to some degree, but maybe benevolent charlatans. So that's a bit of a fascinating kind of look on things. The Schopenhauer goes on, and he talks about ethics, I found interesting as well. He has a bit about aesthetics. He kind of tackles the Platonic ideas of art and all that stuff, and he talks about, again, a lot of what he talks about comes from the basis of talking about things in terms of will to live. But as much as some of it may sound very pessimistic and cold-hearted, there does seem to be a lot of very nice and very thoughtful and very positively oriented, maybe not positively oriented, but very meaningful recollections and very meaningful just thoughts that come out from Schopenhauer's things. And one of the chapters here is called On Books and Writing, where he talks about his love for literature, love for writing, and how he theorizes what constitutes the best of writing and how one should write, and how one, for example, one of the things he says is that he criticizes newspapers. For example, he says that newspapers don't seem to really showcase perhaps the best of writing, and maybe he says that it's partly because, if not totally, because people write for the sake of writing and not for the sake of people write for the sake of writing, as opposed to writing for the sake of having something to say. So people who write for the sake of writing are writing in order to make money, in order to make a living, in order to support themselves. People who write for the sake of imparting ideas and thoughts, those are the ones who actually have writing worth reading, and that's what he talks about there. And it's kind of interesting to read, because given the understanding in retrospect that Schopenhauer was someone who wasn't able to really be popular throughout the majority of his life. He wrote The World as Will and Representation in his early 30s, I think, but it only really came into popularity in his 60s, I think, when he was in his 60s already, towards the end of his death. So he spent a lot of years kind of in relative anonymity, and a lot of that is reflected in what he writes about in the book. He talks about how the greatest of men are never appreciated in their lifetimes. He references Shakespeare, and he references Mozart and Beethoven, and he does a lot of that in Bach. And I don't know if he mentions Bach, but he does again. It's very funny to read it in that perspective, because you know that he's subconsciously, not subconsciously, maybe very directly, kind of referencing himself, and the idea that he believes that he's a great thinker, and that he had a strong conviction that his ideas would one day live on and be influential after his death. And for all that's worth, he was right. So it's a very good collection of works. It doesn't require a lot of pre-reading. A lot of it is kind of explanatory. He has a very nice writing style, and that everything is kind of very nice and succinct. He doesn't go on in too many tangents that make it difficult to read. And overall, I feel like my mind has expanded to some degree by reading this, and it really complemented my reading of Carl Jung, and helped me further elucidate how Dostoyevsky got to his point of writing What Raskolnikov and Everything in Crime and Punishment. So I'm very excited. Next I'll read Goethe, I think, and then finally I'll make it to Nietzsche. But I'm very excited for all of this, and that's Arthur Schopenhauer. I'm a big fan of this, and hopefully one day I'll be able to read more of his work, although I don't think he actually wrote a lot, but I will probably try to read The World is Will and Representation, if it's not too redundant from what I've already read. So yeah, that's the book. It's pretty good.